Okay, why don't we start? I think I don't want to put a damper on the session today here, but we have to talk a little bit about Boston. In case you don't know, about a half an hour or so before I came here, the latest news was there were two suspects. One of them was killed. The other one, I think, is still being pursued by police in Boston. Now, if that news has changed, and believe me, I know Fox 2, WWJ, it's almost the entire news of the day. My question to you, Mayor Bing, we'll start with you. If this had happened in Detroit, would we have been ready?
Oh, I think we would be ready because one of the things that I think we're blessed with is the international waterway. So we've got from both sides of the border, I think public safety officials who have plans, and with so many big things happening in Detroit over the years, our folks are well prepared for this. But the reality is I don't care how prepared you are, you don't stop things like this.
Are you worried, though, that because we are on an international border, we do have a lot of big buildings, a lot of crowds, and we had Mr. Abdul Muttalib, the underwear bomber, not all that long ago, does that heighten up, or have you been in contact with anybody from Boston or FBI because of what happened here?
I can't tell you about the FBI, but I have been in touch with the mayor in Boston, giving him our regards, our sympathy, our prayers from the city of Detroit.
Mr. Ficano, have you been in contact with the FBI?
No. and I don't plan to. No, and I don't plan to be.
How about Boston? What do you think I'm talking about?
One of the things, because as the mayor said, with the international border that we sit on, obviously we're going to have the Free Press race that is an international event that's going to cross over coming this October. There's always a heightened awareness. I know that Homeland Security, it has advanced so much since I was sheriff and 9/11 happened. Before, believe it or not, the best way usually locals got information about an event that was occurring perhaps internationally or involving the federal government nationally is you put on CNN. And that has... Pardon?
Not WWJ or Fox 2 at least?
Well, let's say for national aspects.
Oh.
But now the communication and the coordination has gotten so much better, especially from the federal government, that there's instant information that flows back and forth. All the borders are pretty well broken down, but by that I mean you look at the Tri-County area such as we have over here, and in coordination with Canada, it is light years ahead of where it was during 9/11. And you know that you can't be perfect, but you do as much as possible to be as preventive as to any incident such as Boston. And obviously our hearts go out to all those poor victims, not only died but injured.
Let me get Brooks Patterson, if I could, on the same question there. You guys have lots of microphones work?
It's not turned on yet.
I don't know if it's turned on.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Are we good? We're good. Oakland County has a Homeland Security Department, I believe. Has Oakland County done anything differently in light of what happened in Boston?
Not that I'm aware of. We have a task force, of course, and we've gone to other sites. Bouchard has gone into some of the other sites that were ravaged by, like the 9/11 situation. He went to the ground zero. But we just don't like to charge it. If they call for support, obviously we're going to make available all the troops that we can muster. I was watching the news this morning, as I'm sure we all were. I was just absolutely glued to the screen. And I heard one of the reporters say that the first suspect who was killed, he was shot so many times they couldn't even count the number of entry wounds. And that didn't bother me at all. But remind me of the guy down in Georgia who killed a deputy. Killed the deputy.
Let me crank that up. We don't want to miss one word of this.
All right, so they caught him in a wooded area, and when they finally recovered the body, he'd been shot 49 times. And the police, or the press took umbrage with that, and they said, how come your men shot him 49 times? He said, that's all the ammunition we had. That's what they call tough law enforcement. He went to the medical exam at the morgue for an autopsy, and the doctor came out and said he died of natural causes. I mean, you said, what do you mean, natural causes? He says, you get shot 49 times, you're naturally going to die. So my bet is we don't get number 2 alive either. Yeah, he's already killed another cop today, wounded another officer, so there's not a whole lot of sympathy in law enforcement for this guy.
All right, let me go on. Now, this event is sponsored by the 8 Mile Boulevard Association. Thank them very much. Yes. Did I say that right, Tammy and Tracy? Okay. The Michigan Land Bank is currently negotiating with a number of groups to do something with the Michigan State Fair. Mayor Bing or Bob Ficano, can you give us an update as to what's going on with the Michigan Fairgrounds with the competing issues? And what does it have to do with 8 Mile? Bob Ficano. Go ahead. Or the mayor.
At this point, I think it's a great gateway. It's typical of really example of how you can show the region come together and be able to work together. I know that with the opening they had with the Myers there and the other development that's planned, I believe the Magic Johnson Theater is planned there as well. I think that's going to be something that is going to send the right message that the Tri-County area, and that's where they meet. It's a gateway to go into any one of our counties, and at the same time shows that development can continue on. And to me, it's something very, very positive. It's going to benefit the whole 8 Mile corridor because you're going to have traffic that's naturally going to flow there from the Tri-County area.
Mayor or anybody on the panel, really, is the Michigan Land Bank doing anything else, looking at any other property in Detroit or Wayne County?
Not at this time. Nothing in that kind of scale. You've got somebody here. I saw Joe Ferguson here earlier this afternoon, and I'm sure he's got all of the intimate details about what's planned for that location.
There are a couple of competing plans. That's not been decided. The Myers is a done deal. That's the Gateway project. But then there's another project, though. There's some extra land. There's a couple of competing projects regarding that. Any hint who's going to get it?
Not at this point.
When will we know?
When you know.
Let me get one more 8 Mile kind of issue. Regional Transit Authority. What's the panel think about bus service, regional transportation? Is this needed or is it too costly? Brooks, Patterson, you want to weigh in on that?
Oh, I think it's needed. What type of system we end up with, of course, is yet to be determined. But I've seen the demographics. We have more people coming into Oakland County to work by the hundreds of thousands. And so a lot of people can't get here because they don't have a car. They have to come by some form of public transit. I'm sure the same thing with Bob. You've seen the same numbers. A lot of our guys go to Wayne County, and not everybody can afford to drive a car and pay those parking rates. And so public transportation is the right answer. We just, we're way behind the times, and finally got the RTA signed up.
Bob Ficano, apparently 8 Mile Road was left out of the Regional Transit Authority legislation. You know why?
Well, I think originally what they set it up as some of the main corridors from Ann Arbor to Detroit, down Woodward, and then Gratiot, and there's 2 interlopes that are in between. There's a number of large issues, though, that ultimately has to be determined as well, and 8 Mile can be part of that and obviously plug into the system. Number one, I think eventually you're going to have to go to a system that you don't have competing smart buses, with DDOT, and then the regional transportation. If we can get it eventually, and I know the legacy costs and things like that are the major nut or issue that we have to determine as to what's going to be critical to it. But at the same time, I think it's something that we can have everybody try to go towards the goal of ultimately having one system and not having 3 separate systems that you have to somehow integrate in the process. And I think ultimately that has to be the goal. And I think 8 Mile can play, a part of that, because with one system, obviously the east-west corridor is very critical to moving back and forth across all 3 of the counties.
Mayor, with regard to the Regional Transit Authority, what role would the emergency manager, Kevin Orr, play with that? Or is that a regional authority? Does he have a voice? Does he have ultimate say? How does that work?
The emergency manager has the authority and control over the city of Detroit. I don't think he has any authority over the region at all. And one of the things I'll just add on what Bob was saying, when you add 2 other small systems to the 3 systems he just mentioned, and that would be the People Mover and the M1 rail line, all of a sudden you got 5 different systems with 5 different management and all of that overhead. So some kind of way over the near term, hopefully, we'll get everything up and running, but then you got to think about consolidating everything into 1 or 2 systems.
With talking about regional, there's also a regional water department board. There's been a lot of talk, or some talk anyway, about perhaps leasing the city's water department. Procedural question, what role would the emergency manager? Could he just lease it, should he want? And Mayor, what's your thought on that? I understand it could generate Detroit a lot of money, and it would allow Detroit to keep control of the water department. And there's no federal oversight now.
Well, I'm not going to negotiate that at this table, but there are a lot of things, a lot of talks, a lot of conversations going on right now. And I think over time, we'll come up with the best decision for the entire region, with Detroit still owning the system.
You can't exclude, though, the fact that water department could be leased. Is that right?
Correct.
The procedural element, is this a Mr. Orr decision, or is this a regional? And maybe Brooks or somebody can help me out, or Mr. Ficano, maybe could the board outvote the emergency manager if it turns out that that's the case, to lease the system? Mayor?
Well, you've got 4 of the 7 members are Detroit.
Oh, that's okay. That answers that.
Okay, so Detroit still has the voting rights and control of that board, but I think it was very important early on, as I talked to Brooks, as I talked to Bob, it was important, once again, that we came together on this issue, because we're no longer just competing city to county. It's the region, and I just think the water system supplies, water and to all of these different areas, and so we had to come together, and I'm glad that I'm working with these gentlemen here.
Would you favor a lease?
I'm not ready for that answer.
Hey, Charlie, we have a
Brooks, Patterson.
emergency manager in Pontiac. And many of you will recognize the name Lou Schimmel. He's been there about, not quite 2 years, but he's going to be leaving in about 6 weeks. His job is done. Pontiac's budget has been balanced for 2 years. They're running, a small surplus. Now, that doesn't deal with the long-term legacy costs. That's another issue altogether. But the day-to-day operations of Pontiac is balanced. Of course, there's a price for that. Pontiac doesn't have a police department. They lease from the sheriff. Pontiac doesn't have a fire department. They have a contract with Waterford. Pontiac doesn't have a city hall. They don't have a clerk's office. They use mine at the county. So they gave up a lot to get their books in balance. They had something like 600 or 700 employees. Today they got 40. So you can see how this was accomplished, and a lot of blood in the streets, some tough decisions. But the reason I even thought of this was because Pontiac had a water board, had their own water facility, not near as big as the Detroit system. But Schimmel took it, sold it for $55 million, and we took a substantial part, our drain office did, and with the $55 million, $50 million was applied to some outstanding bonds that were just choking them, and $5 million went into their checking account. So yeah, there is a huge opportunity for a city like Pontiac and Detroit at some point in time, do something smart, and still maintain ownership, but get some hard.
So you would be in favor of a lease then, if it would generate.
Well, it's not mine to give up, but I mean, I'm just saying Pontiac was an example where they lost control under the manager, and they don't have it now, but they got $55 million, paid off a lot of bills.
I think one of the concerns you got to have, Charlie, is like what we just saw this week about Flint making the decision that they want to do their own pipeline in order to facilitate their own water department and not be within the Detroit system. The problem with that is I believe it was an emergency manager up in Flint that made that decision. Had to go to the state for the sign off on it, and suddenly you have an emergency manager that's down in Detroit. Is the state, now signing off on that? It seems to be an inherent conflict that you might have about what would be better for what system. I think overall, one of the Flint situation, if they would have just looked at numbers and cents, it would have made sense for them to stay in the Detroit system. It just would have been cheaper for them to do it at this point in this process. But it's going to hurt everybody now, because if they pull out, the rates, infrastructure stays the same, and so the rates have to go up for everybody else that is still part of the Detroit system.
So are you saying then that the state is making a mistake by encouraging Flint to move out because it could cost everybody in this room more money for water?
What I'm saying is that Flint, with an emergency manager, had to go to the state for the buy-off or the approval to have the ability to do their own pipeline. what I'm saying is there's an inherited conflict because the emergency manager in Detroit has an interest in this region or this water board or this water network to be as healthy as possible. So if you're the state, which one do you decide that can do what at this particular time? I think if you would have had elected officials probably in Flint, they could have gotten together with elected officials in Detroit and say, okay, what is the best situation here for us to make sure that our rates are going to be at a particular level or something like that. I'm just saying there's an inherent conflict in what's going on with what you had Flint and the emergency manager making that decision, and now you have the emergency manager in Detroit saying, well, you're hurting my situation here because now it's going to cost more or I won't be getting as much money.
So to solve that problem, then just have the state take over the water department.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Let me pose another question. Brooks Patterson.
Yeah.
This is a hypothetical county in Michigan. Hypothetical. Let's assume this hypothetical county has a negative cash balance of about $100 million. Let's also assume this hypothetical county regularly spends beyond its budget, and that this hypothetical county, the state has imposed some spending restrictions on this hypothetical county. Would you say that that hypothetical county is headed for an emergency manager?
Bob would answer that. He's a
Hypothetical. Hypothetical.
Oh,
county.
hypothetical.
Hypothetical county.
No, not the hypothetical
We'll
county.
call this hypothetical county.
100
Payne.
million is
Payne.
manageable by any county of any size. If we had it, I'm sure we could handle that over time. Wayne County could handle 100 million in better days when the real estate was higher. But 100 million is not going to push any hypothetical county into an emergency manager. Unless it's little.
100 million is not a lot of money.
Yeah, I know. My budget is a little over 800. Your budget?
You're from Oakland County, right?
$2 billion.
He's pushing $2 billion in his county. I think you can find, you won't pay it off in one day, but you can finance over 10 years and it becomes manageable.
Part of the whole situation here, Charlie,
Hypothetical.
is the bigger circumstances considering the revenue sources and where they've been, where they're coming, and where they're going in the future. Wayne County, for example, and Brooks and Oakland has survived better, fortunately for them, and Macomb, is that Wayne County's lost $100 million because of the housing bubble bursting since 2009. We used to get $100 million more. Detroit used to get substantially more as well. The model's broken because everybody thought that Headley and the Constitution, that the model was always that the revenue was the property values were going to go up. Nobody contemplated what happens if there's this draconian shift in terms of the revenue going down with the housing bubble or with the housing dramatically going down in their assessments. And so even if tomorrow the housing market would dramatically go back up to where it was in 2009, it'd take us till 2025 to get to the same revenue level that we are in 2009 because we're limited to 5% a year of what the increase can be. So the model's broken.
So you're
we
saying
have to do something different than what we're doing right now because there's 80 areas in the state of Michigan. You can't put an emergency manager in all 180 that are facing these financial stresses right now.
So are you saying raise the cap on it's Headley Amendment you're talking about, right?
No,
Are you saying raise the cap?
No, that's not really going to get it for you right now. Because the housing values aren't dramatically going. I mean, they're going up, but they're not going up to the same.
Where can the county get money?
At the same thing. Number one, the state could live up to its revenue sharing obligations. Okay, the way the formula has been set up, at this point. You know how we got to this history of revenue sharing? And I'm not going to
Don't get the history. We don't.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
No.
But we used to have all these little taxes. If you've ever been to Chicago, all these little taxes that the different communities could levy. The state came in and said, let's have one time that we collect it, and we'll revenue share it back, we'll give it back to you. Well, they collect it all now, but they never have lived up to the formulas that they set. Detroit today probably wouldn't have a financial manager if they just would have lived up to what they said what the revenue sharing would be. We wouldn't have the same complete financial stress that we have as well.
If the state had lived up to its promise of paying the city of Detroit its share of the revenue sharing, Detroit may not have needed an emergency manager, Mayor Bing?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Do you think that it's time to change the revenue sharing model for cities in the state?
All they got to do is pay it.
I mean, the state, Charlie, the state today has $500 million in its reserves. And I've heard it could be as high as $1 billion, okay? The state in its proposed budget has increased each one of the departments in the state of Michigan. They've all got an increase in their departments. The rest of us are cutting into what's going on. If you looked at the graph, and it's natural why that's happened, because the state has started to turn around with the auto industry. Okay, you look at it with the auto industry, what's happened is that when Ford's adding 1,200 people down at Flat Rock, you know, the Chrysler facility's adding 1,000 people, they all go on the state income tax rolls, but all that money goes to the state of Michigan. Sales tax, when they go out and Ford pays the $8,000 bonus to each of its workers, and Chrysler and General Motors does the same, they go out and buy stuff, all that sales tax goes to the state of Michigan. None of that gets redistributed back down. We're still stuck with the model of the property tax.
So the state is hoarding money, is really what you're saying.
The state, I think, could step up, and what I'm saying, and we're willing to work. It's called a partnership. To say we're willing to work together, and it's not, you can't put 180 EMs all over the place in the state of Michigan.
Tracy.
Let's come up with a different model that is actually fair in the way things are distributed.
Tracy,
Dave.
we do have an extra chair here if the governor
Welcome
moves
to
the
the
state of Michigan
Bob
table.
Ficano
I think the governor, if you'd like to, he may join us here. Let me ask Mayor Bing. Now, got some nice things to say about the governor, but the president, do you think President Obama has actually done enough to help the city of Detroit? Could he do more?
That's not his total responsibility. He's the president of the United States. He's not the president of Detroit or the president of Michigan. So he has done, his administration has been very, very helpful to the city of Detroit. The Department of Transportation, what we're going to see up and down Woodward Avenue would not have happened without that administration coming to the table. A lot of the things that we are able to do in the neighborhoods could not have happened without the support that we get from HUD. There are other departments in the federal government that we need to tap into, and that's what we're about doing now.
Is there other federal monies out there that the city of Detroit is looking to get? Maybe tearing down blight. I know there was an issue there about the city not using all the money at one point in time. Anything on the horizon?
Well, there are two areas. I think in the area of education and the area of labor are what we need to go after, because a lot of our folks that are either unemployed or underemployed need to get trained. And we don't want to face that. We've got a lot of people who are not trained to take some of the jobs that are going to be available, over the next 5 or 10 years. So you got to get some money out of the federal government for training.
Brooks Patterson, has the president done enough in this region?
Obama?
President Obama.
Hell no.
Well,
Next question.
I can pick up on that, Charlie.
next question, I guess, here.
Charlie, let's not forget the one big thing he did. He saved the auto industry. That really has a lot that has happened in southeastern Michigan.
Let me go back to Mr. Patterson. If next to you the president was right there, what would you say to him?
Oh my God.
careful.
Check, please. I don't know where to start. I mean, first of all, we're about to turn over 1/5 of our economy, called healthcare, to the federal government. That's the same federal government that runs the post office, same federal government that runs Social Security, almost to the verge of bankruptcy. Now we're going to give them 1/5 of our economy to manage, and everybody knows, everybody, even the Democrats in Washington, are saying it's a cluster. So that's why I say, do you really want to do that? Was the system perfect? No. Was it the best system in the world? Yeah. And get the hell out of the way of the private sector.
All right, Mr. Ficano, you want to respond?
I go back to what this landscape would look like if the president didn't step in with Chrysler and General Motors. We'd probably be having a much different discussion right now about the region versus way it actually looks and what the auto industry and the suppliers have been able to do to recover with it. It took the effort of everybody in this room and the congressional delegation and everybody else, but I think we owe him a real big debt of gratitude for what he had the courage to do, because most of the country didn't want him to do it.
Yeah, I know. I got a history book in my office that says the first bailout from Washington came under the Bush administration. I know. I saw that.
Well, actually, the first bailout came under President Carter when he saved Chrysler, if I remember right. That's how it originally started.
Well, I want to thank him for
It's
signing
obviously,
that.
obviously a graduate of the Detroit public school
I'm going
system,
to thank
right?
him for signing the permit for new jobs, which could happen with the new bridge.
Now, you know,
Yeah, here we go.
we're all on
Well,
that.
there's a
one.
bridge question, all
Yeah.
right. So you're happy with that?
Absolutely.
Is this good for the region, the new bridge?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's
Are you upset at Matty Maroon for filing lawsuit after lawsuit, Brooks Patterson? I mean, is he delaying this?
I know,
inevitable?
I know Matty, and I understand exactly what motivates him. He has a monopoly. He wants to protect that monopoly. For him not to file a lawsuit would have surprised me. No, it was anticipated. He's going to lose, and we're going to have that bridge one of these days. And I think it's a huge addition to putting the Detroit region on the map as a center for international trade. So I'm big time for it.
The governor talks about relentless positive action. That's relentless positive action, in case you haven't heard that word before. He says in part that's, no blame, move forward. It's very positive. He really talks about jobs. Can anybody on the panel give me an example of how the governor's proposal has created jobs in your county or city? Mayor?
No.
Well, the one-word answer is a little hard to do. Is the governor being disingenuous?
Not so much that. I don't
He's been
think-
the governor for a while
I
now.
don't think that's an easy thing to do. I mean, he's into his second year. It's very, very difficult. I mean, you just can't turn on the spigot and all of a sudden jobs are available. I mean, you got to have the entrepreneurs that are willing to make the investments and take the risk. I mean, they're the ones who create the job. I just think that we make so many mistakes thinking that government is a job creator. We're not. We shouldn't be. The private sector does that, not us.
Are you?
But, and I agree wholeheartedly with Dave, but what we in government can do is create a pro-business environment. And I think that's what Snyder's trying to do. We're reducing business taxes and trying to make us an attractive place for businesses who are going to relocate or going to come to America from overseas. We want to be competitive. So he's trying to get us to that point.
Has he created jobs in Oakland County?
You know, he said, can I track a specific job? I don't know. Can I talk about some companies that are looking at Oakland County, and for that matter, Michigan, because our competitive business environment? Yeah, I think he can take some credit for that.
Mr. Ficano?
You know, this is really a partnership where everybody tries to create the environment for the private sector to flourish. For example, the RTA, eventually that will create jobs in terms of the economic development that goes along the paths of the, where those buses flow and everything else. The hockey arena, that will create jobs eventually because people have to build it, and there'll be other development that goes around it. The same thing with the bridge. Besides the building trades jobs, besides the temporary jobs, there are other permanent ones that will hopefully grow up around the logistics and things like that. So everybody is into trying to create the environment. We may disagree on certain. I vehemently disagree with the right to work.
That will create jobs?
That part of it. No, I don't think that does at all.
It's going to hurt jobs?
I don't think. Yeah, because it shows that there's still business wants stability. And if you have a state that is still conflicted over that particular issue, the businesses probably isn't going to come in until they know what's really settled and what's going on. And I don't think anybody believes that the right to work issue is really settled yet in the state of Michigan. They may wish for it to move on and for it to be settled, but I don't think that's going to happen. You look at Indiana. I mean, that's held up as the example. They have you go on their website, they have like 20 incentives that they have to try to bring companies into there. I think that probably has a lot more to do than anything to do with right to work that they might have passed in
Real
that
quick,
state.
will right to work create jobs in the state?
Yeah, I think it will, but and of course, Pat's a good friend. They would argue that the jobs they're creating are not the kind of high-paying jobs. The salaries are going to be lower. But I do think I've lost business. I got my economic development guy sitting right there, Matt Gibb, and he'll tell you, if we get right down to the wire, we give it our best shot, and they say, we're going to go down south because your state is so heavily unionized. I do have cases where that has happened. So I won't lose a company on that one issue anymore.
Let me get the mayor. Mayor, you just said that the governor, he's only been the governor for 2 years. There may be a learning curve. He came from the private sector. You came from the private sector. Is there a learning curve in your job? And if so, how long do you think before you you're kind of happy and comfortable with the job of being a politician. How long was it for you?
I'm still not a politician.
I don't mean like these guys, but I mean, in a good way.
I think the learning curve is very, very steep. And Brooks has been there for a long time, so I think he's had the advantage of surrounding himself with some very, very capable people. And because of the county that he's in, from an economic standpoint, I mean, they've been on a growth path for a long, long time. So he's done a lot of things he's done a lot of things right. So, Brooks and I have known each other for a long time, and I'm supportive of what he does and how he manages. But in the city of Detroit, when I took over, almost 4 years ago, in a lot of cases, you didn't know where the bathroom was. You didn't know, you had no data in order to make some informed business decisions.
Brooks never had that problem.
Yeah.
Then you had such a large turnover of people. So you had a lot of institutional knowledge. I mean, I will just say this, in the Kilpatrick administration, you got a lot of very smart young people that got caught up into that, and they were a loss to city government because a lot of them were very, very capable. I probably wish I could have inherited some of them. But I tell you, the learning curve is very steep.
Some of them have some time on their hands now. But at the end of the day, sometimes, Mayor, you just throw up your hands and say, forget about it. I am really frustrated. Maybe like after a city council meeting, hypothetically again. Sorry, Mr. Cockrell, I think he's here today.
If I was going to do that, I'd have done it by now. It gets frustrating.
He turns on Channel 2. He says, I don't have it so bad after all.
No doubt about it. It gets frustrating. But what it is that you have to be respectful of each other, and everybody comes from a different position. And you have to listen to people, and then you have to make the hard final decisions that's best for the citizens of Detroit and the people that live here and work here.
Was it the hardest job for you to say to the governor, I know you had some discussion, you know what, now is the time Detroit needs an emergency manager, and you said, I'm not going to fight it anymore, this is it. Was that the hardest decision for you?
No, it wasn't. It was, he made the decision to bring in the emergency manager. I could have continued to fight that, but that's a losing battle. And in the end, once again, nobody loses but the people who support Detroit. So it was much better to go forward.
Will you run again?
Run what?
The job.
He's not a politician, right?
He's not a politician.
You saw how he dodged that.
Not at all.
Oh, I'm not going to answer that. At the appropriate time.
I spent an hour trying to finagle that question. Somehow I couldn't do it.